for. Today is Monday, January 8th, 2018. Happy New Year. And we have board members Snelling, Plunkett, Marsett, Agosti-Gisler, and Holleman present. Excused absence is Mr. Donley and Ms. Davis. I don't know the status of her attendance today. And I guess Ms. Spencer will not be joining us either. Okay. So first item is our mid-year board goal. We're going to be talking about the updates in terms of performance and graduation as one of our goals, and also the initiatives that go along with that goal. So I'm turning this over to Dr. Bishop.
Sure. Thank you, Madam President. And we'll just move right into a presentation. I am doing an introduction, and then staff that is working in schools as well as with schools will be presenting as well. So to support the reading efforts, we have our lead team, and the math efforts will be Dr. Mark Stock, and the graduation is Mr. Nielsen, and supported by Dr. Johnson. Strumpler. So with that, the board, the Anchorage School District has Destination 2020 goals. And as we know, in order to meet our vision and fulfill our mission, the district must be committed to strategic initiatives and those encompassing goals. Consequently, today, there was a great presentation by the United Way in regard to their partnership with their goals, 90 by 2020. So just as a side note,
90% graduation by 2020.
Correct. And attendance and all that good stuff. So initiative 1 presented for the performance goal was to increase reading proficiency of K-8 students. And in that, we were looking at kindergarten Ames Web, which is a curriculum-based measure for letter sound fluency, and in first and second grade it was the reading RCBM, which is the reading curriculum-based measure. Third through 8th grade measure was for measures of academic progress, and that was for 3rd through 8th grade math. And that's all what we were looking at for Initiative 1. Initiative 2, of course, was that map that I had stated, and then Initiative 3, we won't be presenting on, and this is a more global year-to-year, but we are looking at PSATs, ACTs, and SATs, 7th through 12th grade course enrollments, as well as increasing career and technical pathways for students and increasing those access to those classes. That will come at a later date. So when we look at just literacy, the data are telling. We did not meet mid-year targets for reading. We have a new reading program as well as support in our classrooms. I asked that arrows be placed in these sections to really guide what we're looking for. So in kindergarten for letter sound fluency, we do want the low risk or benchmark group to increase and the at-risk to decrease. So there's certain scores and kids' achievement that you want to look either way. The red dot is to just say that we didn't meet either of those. In first and second grade, we're really within the standard deviation, but in kindergarten, we were far off. To note, our fall and winter achievement on the Ames Web is dynamic. So the assessment that a student starts with, the number of letters, sounds, if you will, or the number of words read, begin with an initial ask, if you will, initially, as we bring the kids in August, and it increases. So the assessment is actually dynamic in that it changes with time, over time. So the goal is to increase the percentage of students that benchmark are low risk, and really our goal is that we want 80% or higher in our district. And we would, of course, want to decrease the at-risk, and that's why the arrows are there. So in reviewing this with our staff and looking at it, it really isn't a surprise. Actually, through our testimony all fall, we heard loud and clear where we were. And some of those hints in my mind were the stress of learning something new and really not having a plan. And we provided in services last year, and there was work at the beginning of the year, but certainly learning something new, especially a literacy program, isn't an easy task. So we provided ongoing support monthly with teams of teachers as well as the coaches. In that, the coaches were really built capacity in coaching, but not necessarily in K2 literacy. And now our experts, we are calling them our lead team. They're helping guide the plan. So the general trend was, we heard it, and some of the comments that were made were, this is developmentally inappropriate. And so I could cue into those discussions about it being developmentally inappropriate, knowing that we didn't really maybe know what the standard was, that we were teaching from a book, but not teaching to a standard. Our materials are really just a vehicle that we use to assist us in meeting the learning outcomes. And the standards are the minimum outcomes that our state has asked. Whether those are Alaska standards or the Common Core. Some of those comments, if you recall, were just that. So we took a step back. I spoke to several schools. We shared with principals and coaches as well about how the standards had changed, what it now looks like. What does it look like for a kindergarten? We still have some really differences of opinion about what students in kindergarten should be doing and shouldn't be doing. However, the ask, if you will, from our state as well as really nationally, where kids are asked to be at a certain level and their outcomes and what they're able to do continues to rise. So what about it? We did have an implementation gap. We noticed at some schools, the support and the understanding of a very explicit defined program was there, and others not. In fact, some of the schools that had high success were those from principals whom the board requested last year to come in and talk about reading. So you noticed it as well. You understood. My understanding is that you do see what an explicit program is that supports children where they are, as well as supports teachers in providing the time of day, the implementation tasks, and whatnot that teachers need. Also heard was, we need more time. We don't have time with kids. We're assessing kids too much. So we did implement for voluntary for schools that would like what we called an assessment sweep. So we established with a retired principal and reading expert a team of retired teachers that were calibrated to provide the Ames Web testing. And they would go in with teams with the literacy coaches to provide the Ames Web mid-year assessment. And schools, of our 60 schools, they had a choice. Do you want this or not? And I believe 31 said, yes, please, I'd like that. And what it did is save time. Teachers could continue to teach. A team would come in, assess their kids, and then enter the data in the system, and it would be done for them. What it also caused was some question of, why are we doing this? Don't you trust teachers? And so teachers continue to progress monitor, but this is a team that came in. What we did notice, and in many of our schools, I'll take even one of our special mission schools, alternative school. It was actually Chugach optional. And the principal shared that I don't know if there was anyone in under the green zone or in benchmark. And at mid-year, they had many kids not only in the watch zone, which is the yellow, that they're right at the cusp, but also in the red. And I asked her, how did your staff feel about that? And what was the discussion? And she said, well, now we know who to help. Now we know who's there. And again, it isn't, when a calibrated team comes in, I mean, it is a statistical phenomenon with assessments that, especially when it's timed, I want my kids to do so well, or, I'm going to help them. I mean, we all know the reasons then why are tests proctored? Well, because, if I'm working with a child, and usually what happens if I'm timing for a minute and I know that the child has it on the tip of her tongue because I've worked with them time and time again, I know they know it, I might allow for additional time. Even 1 or 2 seconds. And it's nothing bad, it's just that when we did the assessment sweep, schools reported that their progress significantly changed. And it doesn't mean that anything was done right or wrong, but over time this will shore up itself as we move on with time. We also noticed and just shared discussions with impact of mobility of students. Our students are moving around, especially in some neighborhoods more than others, and how an explicit or systematic, rather, program might benefit us in understanding what we should be doing with kids and what we can do with kids. So we're establishing in our plan, which is called the priority plan, which the lead team is accomplishing, are those items that are absolutely necessary to provide literacy for all kids, as well as what can be done extra. What is something that if teachers like, whether it's different stories or different subjects, how they can integrate them. So what is absolutely necessary? What is it that we have to do? And what is it that we can do? And so that's the refinement of the plan, and we're going to share that today. I wanted to share some data, though, interestingly, as we were digging through the archives of ASD. I don't know what the assessment was, because in this report it wasn't there, but interesting, an average reading score, so that's a mean of some test, and I don't know whether those are percentile, percentages. It could be a test out of 50, not a test out of 100, who knows, but we studied, even back in 2001 and 2, the reading scores of mobile students in ASD. So mobility is how you report it to the state. It's also called transiency, how kids move, but the state's term is mobility. And an understanding of why do we need a plan to support our teachers is because of this. I mean, they have kids moving in and out and in and out. And in some of our schools, it's upwards of 60-70% mobility, whereas in other schools, it might be 20 or 30%. So that was in 2001 and 2. And what we know from today is when we take all of our scores and look at students who moved, the same is true. It hasn't changed. And that's why we look at alignment of our school district in the actions that we take to have a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And this is more so in really those grade levels and subject areas for which we absolutely need proficiency and skills to build on future learning. So there might be a question of, well, that's probably just poor kids because other kids are fine. That might just be something about our kids. And whether it is or not, we service all kids, we teach all kids. But even when you take out the economically disadvantaged, there is a slight decline, as well as when you get up to 3 moves, it's significant. So we've studied this, obviously, over many years, and it was just kind of a nice surprise to find that in the archives of what we did in ASD. So this isn't a surprise. We know that the effects of mobility reach across all ethnic and social lines, and we can't stop mobility, but we can react to mobility and minimize some of the effects by having a coherent learning system, if you will.
Would you like questions at the very end, or
at the end? How about after my section before we go with others? And that'd be good. So in the past, I shared why would we need a systematic approach to understanding where kids are and how kids learn, and supportive teachers. And this was shared when we learned about MAP, in that this is literally one of our 4th grade classrooms in our school district, and this teacher has 4th graders all day long and loves these babies up, but her little love bugs come to her like this. They come, 2 of them come as beginning readers, not even at a 1st grade level. That Lexile isn't even registered in a grade level yet because it's a beginning reader. Yet at the other end of the spectrum, she has 2 that are reading upwards in the 7th and 8th grade level with the Lexile. It doesn't mean they know the content from 4th grade through 8th grade, but it does know that the complexity of their understanding, the information should be more complex for them. It should not be just simply more. Kids that are exceptional readers and they read more don't necessarily need book reports to keep them busy. They actually need teaching at that level. And so if you look at this class, over tier 1 is where students are on grade level. So we have almost half this class needs something different than just what is at that grade level. So how do we organize our schools to say, where do we meet kids where they are? And interestingly enough, IT and our data systems or our electronic teaching programs, whether it's Starr, they actually help accelerate that. We have smart programs that can assist teachers in supporting the needs of kids. And it is actually understanding how to efficiently and effectively use what we have and in a structure that supports teachers in the work that they do, because it's difficult to address all learning needs. Definitely our community is not homogeneous anymore. So this slide shows Keith Stanovich's research, which has been dubbed the Matthew effect. It refers to the passage in the book of Matthew in the Bible regarding the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. I'm just not to bring up any kind of non-secular issue here, and really it is termed in layman's terms the Matthew effect. And the Matthew effects are not only about the progressive decline of slow starters, but also about the widening gap between slow starters and fast starters. In reading, it is absolutely true. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And we've talked about the second semester of second grade, which is that 7-year-old. We must, because the gap just grows tremendously unless we can get kids at a reading level so that they can have access to information. Only with a firm foundation of phonemic awareness can students learn phonics with ease. Students who learn phonics and are taught to blend those sounds and can spell words as well, and then they read those words. Students who can read actually do read. And so the more you read, the better you get. The less you read, the poorer you get. So when students read, they learn more vocabulary. Students who know more vocabulary can comprehend what they read better and consequently understand more concepts about their world. It is highly understood, highly researched, solid evidence about what makes a reader. Many of our students get this at home without anyone ever understanding that it's actually research-based. We read to our kids. We provide vocabulary to our kids. As they learn those sounds, they connect the sounds of the words that they're learning in school with what they already know in their schema theory. So when we talk about literacy in K2, we're starting to go to the why, because the work is difficult. You've heard, just as I have, about the stress of the job with something new. We really wanted a new reading program, but really the work in it, the learning of it, the stress of it, talking about assessments, looking at where we are, what do I do next, is stressful. And when we provide the supports in school, it's about, well, my time is impacted with that. When we provided time in the summer, not everyone could make it in the summer because they had other plans. Provided time last year, not everyone came. So we're a large school district that's looking to move in a direction to support students and to build capacity in teachers, and we really have to do it in many different ways that fit our learners as well as that fit our instructors. But the why isn't going to change. Literacy begins with us, and it begins with us very early on. And for literacy to be pervasive and ubiquitous in our community, our schools must have a handle on it. That is our big why. So when the work gets tough and there's lots of noise out there, we go back to the why. And our schools and staff and teachers are there. It's just a struggle. When looking at this fall and in really seeing the plan that we had, it's changed. It's been commandeered and given to this lead team because of their expertise. So the what and the how is actually, we are about K2 English Language Arts. We are focusing on that and the instructional program. And the outside entities that you see around there, the circles, are really different actions that we had going on in ASD in different departments, but they weren't coordinated back with the why. Why do we have SEL? Well, we want achievement, and that's really part of that, what's her name? Zaretta Hammond's work about the reason you do something is to have greater achievement for students. Program implementation priority plans, MTSS, how do we communicate this? how are we working with coaches to support teachers with ELA? What do our assessments look like? How do we use them? And what do we leave behind and what do we increase that's going to support student learning in the classroom? So we've started to articulate and just work differently. And with that, to share a little bit about that is our lead team. And if I call your name, if you could stand up so the board knows exactly who you are. Well, we all know Kathy Moffitt is a member of the lead team. Diane Orr, as a practitioner of building and a principal, is part of the lead team. Heather Milton, is she here? She is a member of the lead team as a director here at the district office. Kathy Everett, she's not here. Bobby's here, yep. Bobby Lafferty, Allison Showers-Kloop, Carol Tucker, and Tanya Young. And these folks are actually representatives from different departments in ASD, from ELL and English, from our ELL department, from our ELA department and our curriculum department, from Title. Where else did you folks come from? So it's different departments coming together to support the same work rather than supporting it in a silo. We've changed the team. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team. They've worked together and they actually came in over break also to work, put in many hours, and they are the lead team because they are going to lead us to literacy change in our district. With that, I'll just turn it over. I'm not sure where to take it from here, but I know that they've planned for this.
Good evening. So I'm going to go over the essential components of reading instruction. And these are the research-based components of a complete reading lesson. And instruction really matters when we teach these components. Reading is not a natural process. And so these components, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocab, and comprehension, they really need to be taught explicitly and systematically. So reading is rocket science. Our refined plan highlights the need for a district-wide implementation that is consistent. And when we talk about explicit and systematic instruction, there's some very key things that need to be included. There needs to be a focus on critical content, skills, and strategies. These concepts need to be taught from the easiest to the hardest. There needs to be clear directions along with using research-based instructional routines. There has to be modeling, sufficient practice, and a gradual release of these responsibilities to lead to that mastery learning. And of course, students should be engaged. They should be carefully monitored, and corrective feedback should be given by teachers. We'll be showing you some videos of what this explicit and systematic would look like in a classroom. Our first component is phonemic awareness. It's an essential foundational skill. Phonemic awareness is identifying speech sounds and words and the ability to manipulate those sounds. A child's level of phonemic awareness is widely considered the strongest single predictor of their future reading success. It is very important to master. So when we show you this next video, you're going to see a teacher helping students blend sounds together. And remember, what makes it a phonemic awareness activity is that students don't see any letters. This is all by hearing. The teacher will tap on a cube that represents the sound in the word, and then she'll tap along each cube, and then those students are asked to blend those sounds together to make the word. She's always going to model that instruction first so kids are successful at completing the task.
App, cap. Fresh. Now it's your turn. Ready? App.
Cap. Those.
Are.
Are.
Nice work.
Next is phonics. With the phonics instruction in kindergarten, students need to be taught to recognize the letter-sound correspondence of the alphabet and to learn to sound out simple CVC words. Then, as we get into first and second grade, students are taught the sound spellings so that they're able to recognize and read blends, vowel teams, diagraphs, and multisyllabic words, which is very key for the third grade proficiency. It is essential to teach a complete phonics lesson in order for students to master the skill of reading. And this lesson needs to include the phonemic awareness warm-up, the introduction of the new sound spelling, blending the new sound, and then reading or practicing that decodable book. And this lesson needs to happen in an uninterrupted time block. So in this next video, the teacher is going to model and show students by putting a letter on the board, because now we're into phonics, it's actually seeing the letters. She'll prompt them by tapping under it for them to say the sound. She'll put up the next letter. She'll tap for them to say the sound, then she'll swipe under the word so that they blend the sounds together. She'll work through the whole word so that they're ultimately reading the word, but it's teaching them how we blend letters together to read a word.
We're going to blend some sounds to make some words. I'm going to write a sound. When I tap under the sound, you say the sound. When I sweep underneath the sounds, you're going to blend the sounds together. When I slide my finger, you get to read the word. Are you ready? Here we go. Ready? Here we go. Sound. Sound. Blend. Sound. My turn. Sound. I. Your turn. Sound.
I.
Nice job. Let's start over. Here we go. Are you watching? Sound. Sound. Blend. Sound.
I.
Blend.
Fly.
Sound. Blend.
Fly.
Word.
Fly.
Nicely done.
As you can see in that example, correcting is, that corrective feedback is so important. We always need to make sure students are corrected and practice it again the correct way. So next is fluency. Fluency happens from accurate, rapid, expressive oral reading, which really takes a lot of practice to build that automaticity. Fluency is important because it bridges the gap between word recognition and comprehension, meaning a child who is automatic with word recognition can focus more on the text meaning than having to work at decoding those words. This instruction happens by students practicing oral reading daily, along with the teacher providing that corrective feedback again. So this next video will show the first grade instruction of fluency practice with our Reach for Reading decodable book.
Story today, and we are going to be practicing, remember, we're going to be practicing being good readers. We're trying to be good readers, and we want to practice fluency. Remember, fluency means that we sound like we talk when we read. So we're going to use our best reading voices. Okay? Get your finger under the first word. Make sure your eyes are looking where your finger are, and think about that best reading in your voice when we're reading our story today. Okay? When I give a signal today, my signal is going to be a click. So you're going to hear my finger snap, okay? When you hear my finger, you can start the story by yourself. When you hear my click again, you're going to stop reading and go back to the beginning of the story. Okay, get your finger ready under the first word. Ready, read. Whisper. Stop. Go back to the beginning of the story. Touch your finger under the first word. Now we're going to practice our fluency. You're going to read with my voice. Keep your voice with my voice. You may not read ahead. Read with me. Touch your finger under the first word. Ready? Read. What kind of bird is this? It's a flamingo. A mother flamingo has an egg in a mud nest. The mother will watch over the egg almost all of the time. Nicely done.
So the purpose of the whisper reading is to having students apply all that phonics work that we've done just beforehand. It's like teaching a child to ride a bike. You have to have them just do it, even if they fall off, because you're going to be there to give them that corrective feedback right away. But they need to practice. If we read it right with them right away, they wouldn't have to use their mind and really apply their phonics knowledge. So we always want them to whisper read it first and try and apply that phonics they just learned, and then we're going to read it with them to build on that fluency. So vocabulary. Vocabulary refers to students' knowledge of and memory of word meaning. Vocabulary knowledge is demonstrated through reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Vocabulary knowledge and reading comprehension are highly correlated. As students are learning to decode words, they also need to learn new vocabulary. It's another extremely important skill that leads to better reading comprehension. There are two ways that we teach vocabulary. We teach words directly, which we call specific word instruction, which research says students can learn about 10 to 12 words per week, but that's not enough for them. So we have to teach them another strategy, and we teach students the strategy to figure out the meaning of words while reading in the context. And so we call this the word learning strategy, so that students really do reach that goal of necessary vocabulary learning through the grade level. Lastly, research also confirms that having a strong vocabulary can have a positive effect on a student's success in school, on standardized tests, and their future educational and work endeavors. And comprehension, last but not least, but it's our ultimate goal, comprehension. It is why we do the type of instruction, all that explicit and systematic instruction in the other four components, so that we can ease the way for that comprehension. It involves using intentional thinking to construct meaning. And students must be taught skills and strategies to have a backpack full of tools to use flexibly and as needed as they are figuring out the meaning as they're reading. These skills and strategies are harder to teach because of the metacognition that goes on while we're reading. So in this instructional area, it is especially important to assist teachers with how to explicitly and with consistency teach these vital skills and strategies to students. And so as we discuss bridging this gap between the decoding and the comprehension, it's essential that in kindergarten, first and second, that we make sure students are proficient in those foundational skills, those phonemic awareness skills, their phonics skills, so that they are able to read automatically, because we know once they reach those proficiencies, they will be able to comprehend and read well. So for our literacy action steps, we are implementing the K-2 English Language Arts curriculum program. We're doing weekly professional development with our instructional coaches. We talked about the Ames web testing teams that are currently active. And we have a planned K-2 multi-tiered system of support framework that we're helping schools establish and implement in their schools. So our next steps is we're going to redefine, develop, and finalize our core and core plus priority plans. And these plans are going to help teachers identify those highly researched, most effective components in our program that they must be teaching. These programs come with many activities in them, more than a teacher could ever teach. And we need to help them prioritize what is most important, what is going to get the biggest bang for your buck, if you will, out of students so that they truly do make academic progress. We will be starting our focus on foundational literacy skills training with the instructional coaches and the K-2 teachers, and that will start in a couple weeks. And then we'll also be doing a foundational skills implementation with the principals, because the principals and the coaches need to be a team together, really helping to implement and support teachers through this journey. We'll continue to refine our MTSS implementation process and helping principals and teachers understand how we use our data to make sure we're meeting all students' needs in our building. And then we'll continue to expand our Ames web testing teams.
Thank you.
Madam President, this time that is the literacy update, and the team is here to answer questions. So
I'd like to open it up for questions. Mr. Holleman.
I wanted to ask, in the examples, is that an intervention class for specific students?
Well, we just gathered a little bit of a group of students just for an example to show what that type of instruction would look at.
Okay, so
They're just a group of first grade students that we grabbed from a classroom.
So it would be a gen ed class of 20, 25 together. And do they stay on the same sentences together for the entire block? I mean, is it?
It depends on what level you're on. So in that first grade group, many of those students are getting to the point where they don't need to. So we have a progression of how to help students navigate through reading proficiencies. And so eventually they will be able to read on their own more in paragraphs as they become more proficient. We actually use our Ames web data and look at how many words they read per minute to actually know and help them and where they go next.
So the different kids in the room might start to break up in terms of,
Yes.
some are reading some things. Some
Absolutely. Yep. We do small group differentiation.
Okay. It did look awfully uniform.
Well, and we wanted to show it was more to show what the teacher does. It's more to show that explicitness so that kids, there's no question. One thing that we really want to make sure is kids practice things correctly. If kids practice things wrong, it's hard to retrain that brain. So making sure that we set up kids for success is something that is really important.
Madam President, interestingly, in other constructs, we do this all the time. We will immediately correct someone on a musical instrument. We will immediately correct someone shooting a basketball. But for some reason, we've kind of thought, oh, that might be okay. And what they've learned is that kids are eager to learn. And if we share correct methods, they generally come out with better outcomes.
Snelling.
On the Ames web, I know that we switched to MAP for grades 3 through 8. Did we stop doing Ames web past grade 2 at this point?
I believe it's left up to the school and how they use the data. Yeah.
At my school, I use Ames web all the way through grades, K through 6.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Marsett?
So I have a question. Once you have your, let's say, classroom of 30, because we're getting there, and you're doing the reading together, and you're realizing some kids are not moving, and now you're regrouping those children. How does that look?
So at my school, we do a walk to read, and it depends on the grade level. In kindergarten, we don't do a walk to read the very beginning of the school year because we need children to just acclimate to kindergarten and their teacher. But in first grade, we will do a walk to read right from the beginning of the year. So once we have done all the assessments, we look at where students are, and then we group them by what their needs are. And so even though that 90-minute block is going to contain all those essential components of a reading lesson, we're going to do it a little bit more explicitly. Or if they're on track, we might not have to do it so regimented so much. So we look at where kids are, we meet their needs, and then we take them from there. So we utilize people differently in the building to help get that differentiation happening. If I have 3 first grade teachers in a building, one teacher may take the kids that are on track and really move with them. The other teacher might take what we call the strategic group and help really hone in on the skills that they need, along with keep moving them along. Because remember, it's always about keeping them on track and getting them up to those reading proficiencies. And then that last group, we're going to try to keep the smallest, because the smaller the group size, the more intense the instruction we can get, the more opportunities to respond for kids. And so we're going to even intensify, and that instruction is going to look differently for those students.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
So once you do that, in this curriculum, and maybe I misunderstood, but in this curriculum, there are supplements, supplements not the right word, but there are things for teachers to use for those different groups to help them in their reading. So our coaches then are going, or if they're not already, that's part of what they're doing, is being able to go in the classroom and say, you have, let's say, the third group that's really not progressed as long. What they're doing is maybe coaching as to how to implement that or what to use to move those students forward. Explain that a little bit to me.
And I'm going to take it in 2 different ways there. I think we're getting there. We're helping. We first needed to get the program into the classrooms first. And so that intervention, if you might say, happens over some time. We first got to get them and teachers feeling comfortable with teaching the program.
Just to share along that, we, one of the first things, even after 8 weeks of school started, there were some staff that didn't use the new curriculum.
Right.
So we had to, really go in there and share because of this mobility issue and
Right.
what we're doing. So.
But we also, not only do we have our 90-minute block, but we also have a win time, or what I need time, or an additional time, because it's important if kids are not at where they're supposed to be. It's telling us we still have to teach them in that 90-minute block. We still have to make sure they're getting grade level or on track material. But what it's telling us is we need to give them even more time, because they're a little bit farther behind. We have to give them additional time in very specific areas that they need help in to help them catch up. And that's really what that 40-minute block is for. So we differentiate definitely within the 90, but we even give them additional time in a 40, even more intense instruction.
So I want to do a follow-up. So is the win time, does every student have a win time at 40-minute block?
Yes.
Based on whether it's accelerated or
Yes.
on grade level or remedial?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we accelerate when, and use different things to help, project-based and.
Well, it occurs to me in this curriculum, it was very rich in terms of
Yep.
supplementary things. So it's probably easy to find for the kids who need the enhancement or the, you know, ahead of grade level, you have a lot of those resources.
Absolutely.
Does it give you enough for those who are in the remedial or in the, you know, the highest tier? It is, excuse me, the highest tier is the highest need, right?
Tier 3 is, yeah.
Okay, so I have a lot of reading background, and I have used, or we, the school district title, and even it went through the whole school district, has very specific interventions that are research-based that we know work, that we have used. So in the meantime, because this is all new, this curriculum is new, I continue to use those sound interventions that we know that work, that we have had in this district. For example, phonics for reading. So if a student, 95% of the time, if a child is not reading at grade level, it's a phonics problem. And so the very first thing we do is we assess and see where that phonics gap is. And then we know exactly what intervention to do with them by that assessment. And so we plug them in right to where that gap is. And so we have to keep building that mastery of the phonics continuum. And we're going to make sure that they know all their phonics. And really, that's supposed to be mastered by the end of 2nd grade. And so we're going to track and help kids to see where they are on that phonics continuum, or if they have a gap, if they're older, and we're going to hit that intervention during that win time.
So part of our plan prior to this was that, and we've had it for years, like we've said, but we've had, this is what you could use.
Yeah.
And it was really volunteerism. And so schools that were structured to where they really paid attention to this and reorganized kids to ensure that, really moved on and could do that. But it was more of a, this is what I could use, but not necessarily something that I needed to use or talk about. And so the list grew. And so what we're doing is going back and looking at programs, especially in the Tier 3 involving special education,
yes,
because Tier 3 is generally a replacement curriculum. And in having the choices kind of be supported, if you will, by the district, whether it's with professional development or what have you, so that we can ensure the learning and that teachers have support in the different programs that maybe over the years have just been, you know, purchased for here and there.
So what I'm hearing, the difference is it's going to be systematic.
Yes.
So that every
Yes.
child, it's not an option. This child needs it. This is what they need. This is what they're going to get. But then the consistency in use of the materials is because of our transiency piece, where if they suddenly change a different school, they're not using a different program.
Right.
Yeah. Ms. Marsett.
So I'm glad to hear that, because I think what kind of happened, or maybe what's happened, and I'm glad to see we're doing this, is that in the absence of having that good direction or understanding where we needed to go, I think some of our teachers used what they had because that's what they knew. Of course. So this is, I'm very glad to see this, that we are looking at systematic and everybody will be using the same thing.
A menu of the same thing. And with that, it is that. It does support teachers, but I want to be crystal clear that you will also, and we have heard it at the table, leave me alone and just let me teach. I don't need a systematic plan. I don't need, and the reason really is, you saw the picture of a teacher's class. We really have those so everywhere, and to where guaranteeing now that kids learn is difficult for teachers to do alone. And so the support is there, but by the same token, until we see success and start getting used to it, you will hear exactly what we hear. Just leave me alone. You hired me to be a teacher, leave me alone. And we know that those outcomes don't always come with that, especially just in the access skills. We really need to get good at the access skills, which is this part of it, so that they can learn. And then teachers and students blow the tops off of creativity and engagement and all kinds of learning when they actually have those skills to do that.
So, I am a big proponent of, I think we need, you know, especially in this program, and instructional coaches are so instrumental in the success of this, is that we really need full-time coaches in all of our schools. And I don't know how we need to do that, but that's something we need to take a look at.
I do know that we are on our regular session agenda. We're looking at a grant to go forward to the federal government to at least continue the instructional coaches we have now.
Right.
Where we go with that, that's.
And we are looking at ways, because we do know that, and the lead team is probably happy to hear you say that, and the schools, because it's the schools that, where principals are experiencing half of this, have shared that same.
Which is exactly where I've heard it from. Yeah. So the other thing too is, what is the difference if I were to attend a professional development for coaches next week? What is the difference between what they received last year? What's going to be different about it?
Meaning just in the fall. And maybe the lead team or Kathy Moffett, would you like to? Either
Say a
one.
little bit and then you can add on. I think at the beginning of the year, I was in my school, but I from my understanding, it was really to try to help them learn how to be a coach, their coaching skills, and a little bit on the program from the publishers, but that is, you know, publishers publish the program and they don't really teach them deep down what's necessary and what's in a program. So I think they got some superficial training on the program. What you're going to see differently in the next 2 weeks is very explicitly how we teach a research-based program to its utmost effectiveness.
That was my understanding, and I'm so glad to hear it. Thank you.
And I'm going to say this even though it sounds very blunt. If all of our students are achieving at a reading level they need to, then I think this board should say, lay off, step back, give teachers the independence they want. But when we see the crucial effect of a child getting into 3rd grade and not being literate, not being able to read to learn because they haven't learned to read, I don't think we can sit back and allow that to happen anymore. So I do support the fact, you know, it's hard, I know, as a former classroom teacher, to have someone tell me how to do the job I have. It grates, but at the same time, if the results aren't being achieved, I think you have to acquiesce that something different has to be done.
Well, I guess along those lines, the question would be, where this has been implemented with fidelity, what rates do they achieve? I'm guessing it's not perfection, because it's a pretty imperfect world. But what are the examples of, say, a district that's been using this for a couple of years and was able to implement it with the resources that they needed to have?
I can share other districts, but you're looking at a person who, in all these categories in a district-wide, where all of those indicators of student success went down, they weren't where we wanted, but in certain schools where it was implemented, they have different success. Their students are achieving more and learning the growth of their students at a higher level than not. And that was just experienced in our own school district when we found schools that systematically supported teachers in this work and understood it, and those that didn't, that just said, here's the books in your room, have at it. You know, that frustrated teachers more than anything. But when they built the capacity together, their outcomes were different. But we can certainly find districts that have implemented this program and share those. You know, what you're looking for is 80% proficiency. You're not looking for perfection 100%. In our general public, 80% of our kids after leaving a grade level should be on grade level. Yeah, and that's our goal.
It's the longest this has been in effect in ASD? Like our school that's been using it the longest, how long is that?
Just, this is a brand new program. No school has used this program.
Okay, so when you're saying the results have
Just this fall in the schools that implemented it, did, yeah.
So for example, first grade, the first grade group right now, there are more kids reading in the strategic category. They're not quite benchmark, but there are more kids reading more words at that winter benchmark than the year before. So even upping that ante and having this harder curriculum, I can see has really pushed the kids. So where they are reading more words per minute at this stage of the game. And that's exciting because we really want to look at oral reading fluency at the end of the year. It's a really huge benchmarker between winter and spring, and to see that we have much more of them already at the strategic in that middle section, it's so much easier than to get them to benchmark. So that's very exciting.
One other thing I wanted to say before we move on is, you know, we've talked quite a bit about incentives for attendance in the schools, and I often wonder if we shouldn't ask the community for help in incentives for staying in the same school. In other words, everybody who stays in the same school for one quarter, you know, a name goes in a drawing for some type of a family prize. Something to really, because I really don't think that's been emphasized enough. It's not just going to school, it's going to the same school really helps. And I know it's not possible for all, but in some cases there are those opportunities, and I don't think many people in our community are aware of the direct academic impact when they change as frequently. Mm-hmm. Ms. Mark. Okay.
If we were to go down that path, I think we would have to be very careful, because it's not necessarily, the student has no say as to what school they're going to go to, where they're going to live, and the family may not either.
But I do know in some of our CIT that they're actually given vouchers and things to be able to leave the kid in the same school, gas vouchers or transportation and all. I know that's not funding that we have universally, but it's at least, at the very least, to start making the information available about how this, you know, changing school, how that impacts a kid's performance. Just like we've done a big, you know, community awareness of how attendance plays a role in whether you even graduate. So, yeah. Other comments, questions? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the second part is the math update, and we also included a question by a board member in regard to specifically the math program. So we'll have to share it because it was from member Donley, and I just asked Mark Stock to include some information about Go Math, and so we'll turn it over to Mark.
Very good. Thank you. Amanda Barr, our math coordinator, was going to be with me tonight, but she is ill. So she and I are working through this, so we'll work through it together. As you're aware, our board initiative or goal talks about increasing the percentages of students who exceed typical growth. And the reason that's a growth goal is pretty obvious, is that we're trying to exceed the levels of growth so that we can achieve national standards or national growth rates in mathematics. So that's the way it is worded. That measurement comes from the MAP test, which is the measurement of academic progress given in grades 3 through 8. So we will be using that assessment for that. Amanda wanted me to cover real quickly, just for you to know, that in 2007 we had a program called Everyday Math. Some of you may, I see you shaking your heads, some called it Math All Day. Depends on, I guess, your love of that particular program. In 2011, something interesting happened. The district brought in the Council of Great City Schools to study mathematics here. And I just finished reading the full report. It's 100 and some pages, has 77 recommendations in it that was recommended to our district to look at. And 3 of those, I think, are very, very pertinent to what you just heard from our literacy folks, which is very fascinating. But there's a reason why we are heavy lift in literacy right now and not math at the same exact time. And one of those reasons is the new Alaska standards in mathematics require a lot higher levels of literacy than previous assessments from 10 years ago. because there's so many more word problems. Students are given math problems now in not in isolation. They're given scenarios and they're asked to create calculations, like figure out how much carpet you need if your room is this size and this size, and tell me how many square feet of carpet, and if carpet is $2.99 a yard, how much do I, on and on. So there's a lot more things to put together. So it's really, I think, important for us that there be a strong literacy background laid on top of a very explicit math program. And there was a word you heard our literacy team use multiple times, and that word was explicit. Interestingly enough, one of the recommendations from the Council of Great City Schools was that we as a district become much more explicit about our math and about the way we're focused on math and how we look at math. And one of those other recommendations follows exactly what's going on with literacy. And a quote from it, it said there was a concern that math teachers are not sure exactly what is required and what is optional. In other words, most of these programs that we adopt have far more material and content than can conceivably be taught, and every teacher will tell you the pressure they feel when there's so much there. They're always slightly unsure of what to emphasize and what not. And yes, we do try to put out academic plans that try to describe that, but there's still always this consternation, and that was one of the recommendations that came out of the 2011 study here, which is how can we get more explicit with our mathematics? And I thought that was fascinating that you heard that same best practice coming out of the literacy group. Common Core as a state, you know, was adopted in 2012, and now the PEAKS test that we gave our first go-round with that last spring. And you probably don't remember, but I know we did a graph that showed you the progression, and we do have some math concerns. The longer those students go, grade by grade, the less those proficiency rates are really there. And if I remember right, our sophomore class, it was listed as 14% of the students who took the assessment were proficient. Certainly not going to cut it in the world we're living in right now. So we will have to begin to work on mathematics a little deeper. The Go Math program, some of you had asked questions about that. It was adopted in 2013 as one of the resources, and our academic plans were updated to that effect. One of the confusing parts about the academic plan is that to meet the Common Core methodology that's in the PEAKS assessments, they can't just do the Go Math in the exact order in which every chapter is written. So the actual academic plans that the teachers here put together don't go in the same exact order of those books, because to meet the assessment needs, they do them in a different order. So if teachers are adept at reading their academic plan, then they would be able to keep up with that. Next slide, please. So there was a benchmark pilot. It was part of a discussion that you did here this fall. There was a concern about the levels of assessment and how much assessment that we were doing. One of the things that Amanda Barr had put together was a voluntary 20-question quiz that sampled the Common Core standards in the fall that we had hoped would be learned by the students up until that point in the academic plans, and she sampled them. We had almost 1/3 of the ASD students took it. It was a voluntary exam, just a 20-question quiz in grades 3 through 6, and the average success rate on that from the students was 60%. So literally 12 out of 20 was the average amount that we'd hoped to see a higher score. Amanda has put out some materials to staff on how to look at that, and some of those items that we didn't do well on, she is going to recycle those back in a spring benchmark voluntary assessment that we can sample and see how if teachers went back and retaught that, because some of those are prerequisite. The spring assessment will also include computational, as well as just the problem-solving type things that are more inherent to to the Alaska standards in the way they're written. One of the weaknesses to Go Math that has been expressed has been the level of computational, and maybe you might just say learning your facts, the roteness, the automaticity of knowing your math facts. And we need to work on that. And one of the reasons is just what you heard from our literacy team. When students are automatic in their phonemic awareness and their phonics, their minds are free to take a look at the comprehension aspects of what they're reading. Same thing is true in mathematics. When students have a high degree of proficiency and automaticity with their math facts, when you give them a word problem, they're not as bogged down in the thinking of what to do with this carpet square and how do I figure that out. They're not bogged down in just the computation piece. And that's a little bit of a dual, sword. We got to look at both sides of that. It's both automaticity and it's also the higher level thinking and problem solving aspects. So the Go Math is not necessarily known for its rigid work with facts and automaticity. So that's something we're working on. And last of all, next steps, where we go from here, Amanda will be putting out a voluntary spring benchmark that'll come out before peaks, and it will try to sample some of the things that we anticipate the peaks test will have on it, and maybe give teachers who pick that up and run with it a little more information about whether their students are ready. She also intends to evaluate the usefulness of that. It's been a voluntary thing that we put out, find out whether or not the teachers who used both assessments and whether they found it to be helpful or not. We'll also be analyzing the MAP results and report back to you after MAP assessments are over whether or not we met our district goals for growth. And last of all, we have some really heavy lifting to do looking forward at how to realign a lot of our math work, grades 6 through 12. One of the changes in the PEAKS test this year is that 9th grade assessment is going to be heavily algebraic, and it did have other things on it at the sophomore level last year, and the ones that they're giving this year. So again, we'll have to look at how we align those courses. So that's an update.
So I have a quick question. So the benchmark is not the map. That's an
Correct.
Additional option.
This was an option, yes, because what happens with, it's a curriculum-based benchmark. So what happens with MAP, it takes kids where they go and where they're ready to learn. So if I'm a 3rd grader and I whip right through those 3rd grade benchmarks, I'm now up into 4th, 5th, 6th grade material. So it gives the teacher an idea of how far can that student go, where are they ready to learn at. This is simply a measurement of that grade level's sampled standards. So it only samples 3rd grade materials. So if I'm actually performing at a 1st grade level in math, I'm going to struggle with this. If I'm at a 6th grade level, I'm going to get 100 on it, and it's going to be pretty easy for me. So that's why we did it as a voluntary sample and made it short and fairly simple.
Okay. Ms. Marsett?
So my understanding is we know, and I'm just going to use that word, we know that our, like multiplication, division, that sort of thing, that Go Math doesn't address that well. And so that I know that some teachers are doing supplementary type things in their classrooms, but do we know, I mean, it's kind of like back to reading. I mean, who's doing what? How effective is it? Are they doing it? I don't want us to say, okay, we're going to tackle reading first and we'll just put math on the hold until we can't
Wait.
well, no, it's not just that, but I mean, we can't be stagnant in one area until we get another area where we want it to be. So I really, when you said we're working on it, I guess I don't know what that means, working on it.
Yeah.
I will share. We that whole understanding, we do know why, and we know anecdotally, and we haven't had really comprehensive assessments in math. We did what we wanted, and now that MAP has been implemented in the lower grades, the benchmark has always come with the program. We just chose never to do it. So we've had Go Math, and this was the first year. Many schools did do it. I've been to schools that they do it religiously, they do it regularly. and use those data to determine their next actions. However, it's not, again, ubiquitous in the district, and so we needed a starting point to have the discussions about the support of the reasons to move, because, you know, we really are changing a lot, and the stress level of folks is there. So it's not that we're just waiting, we're using what we learned from these smaller groups of folks to determine our plans, and then we'd have the evidence to say, this is who we are and where we want to go, so these are the plans to get there, to build that capacity to move. So having those assessments, as well as the map that we've never had before in the lower grades, all across, will actually share that impetus and the reason why we need to.
Timeline?
Really gathering the data this fall and then setting up things for next year. And it's not void of that. We're having the conversations with principals, but there are quite a few asks out there already. So
Mrs. Barr,
they're using
she's
it.
Put together, Member Starr through the president, she's put together some options for us to look at for next year to start studying how those course selections, grade 6 on through, would work. The way that's designed right now is we purposely chose this benchmarking piece for grades 3 to 6 because K to 2 is deeply involved in the literacy piece. So the reason for 3-6 is so that every elementary teacher wasn't going through the, both subjects simultaneously, which is a really heavy lift. So we purposely chose to focus on 3 through 6 for this year and next year.
Are we going to delay rolling out the reading program next year for 3rd through 5th?
Through the president, Member Marsett, not necessarily a delay, but right now the work is focused on K2. Okay. We are working with purchasing so that we can get the materials. But for me, kind of refocusing on something new, left work undone. And so I said, let's get this right. And then once we have a priority plan, it's going to be so easy to roll it out at any other subject and at any other grade level.
Ms. Snelling?
Trying to figure out how to ask the question, because you talked about it a little earlier, that where kids are tested, in the order that they're tested doesn't necessarily align with the chapters in the book. Are they having to learn things out of order, or is the test sequence I feel like one is wrong and one is right, and we're having to modify something?
Well, many of us have had that debate. All I can really tell you from listening to Amanda talk about how our teachers came to that is that when the Go Math materials were purchased in 2013, they had looked at the cycle of the Common Core standards that Alaska was looking at, and the teachers themselves from each grade level came in over all the summer and worked on how those academic plans should be structured to deliver those standards. And there were some grade levels, certain, and I couldn't tell you which ones. We have a master plan that shows all that, but there were a number of those where different things were covered in a slightly different order. And it doesn't match up. And this is also common across the country because states put together multiple tests, and all the districts have different programs and content. And they're not always in alignment. And so districts are always patching their local curriculum to cover what their state's testing. And so they'll do things out of order to cover for the PEAKS test. Say that we'll have chapters where certain things at a 4th grade PEAKS assessment isn't covered till Go Math gets to it after the test is over. So teachers will redo the order to try to prepare kids for that a little bit. And so because these tests don't occur in the last day or week of school, there's always stuff on those grade level standards that can be challenging for teachers. So it's not a perfect answer, but yeah, there's a lot of things like that that are covered out of order.
Is it to the detriment of the learning process, though, if they're having to do things out of sequence just to match a test that, it's going to put inherent gaps in
It would only be detrimental in the sense that if you're teaching something that is completely prerequisite, if you tried to cover 4-digit division before you did 2-digit, that would be detrimental.
Yeah.
But you know, as far as like content that's not dependent, they can do those out of order. But yeah, anything that's so sequential like that is a challenge if it gets done out of order.
I've got, as you know, a couple of kids in the district, and I got to see, just by coincidence, that they each had the same book for Go Math for 2 different schools. Chapters were in completely different order because one was purchased at the beginning and the first initial textbook buy, and the second batch was purchased a couple of years later after some of these things had been addressed. And it was really weird to see 2 exact same cover books with completely different pages
Orders.
and orders in them.
Interesting.
And so I'm aware of that, rearranging.
All right, Ms. Marsett?
I have a comment, I guess, more than a question, but when we look to see if we are at a place where we are ready to move forward with the 3rd through 5th grade, will we be, I don't know, polling's the answer or what it is, but will we be asking our teachers if they're ready?
For math?
No, I'm sorry, for reading. I mean, just to, I know I'm kind of off topic here, but it's kind of,
You're talking about instituting the new curriculum?
I'm talking about before we move forward with, and I'm not talking about math, sorry, so I apologize, but it kind of all falls along this. With reading, when we talk about we're not going to move into something else until we're ready, some of the things I hear is that teachers don't feel like they're being heard. And so are we going to ask our teachers if how they feel, or if they're comfortable, or if they're ready? And I know we're not going to get all the answers. I mean, I don't know. I
would
just
say
want to
that
know.
it's not necessarily ready. It's about having a plan. And what we're talking about is we had academic plans that laid out a map, but there wasn't support in a priority plan that demonstrated this is how to do this, this is how we're going to support you, this is what we're going to do. There'll be people that were ready yesterday, and then there's people that will never be ready because of change is difficult. When we have the system in place to support is when we'll move forward. And that is determined from this lead team in regard to K2 and getting it right. And they're going through classes right now to better meet the needs of coaches, who then can better meet the needs of teachers. So readiness by the individual is probably very different. If we were to rely on that in our school district, probably nothing would start. But is it the readiness of the support that must be received by schools and teachers? Absolutely. That's what it's resting on, and that's why I put it on hold.
And I totally agree with all of that, but I also know that there has to be something that includes our teachers in this decision, and however we do that, I think it's very important that we hear them.
Absolutely. That's agreed, and that happens at schools, in leadership and building capacity in people to do the work.
Any other board members?
Madam President, there were just a couple of more items. If we could review those very quickly, we could. They're more of an update on policy actions, so they won't be as detailed, but we have our team coming up that's leading some of these areas. And we might we go a little bit in after 5:30? So we have just one focus on staff and students, I believe. So.
All right, Madam President, thank you. So Glenn and I are here to talk about our graduation initiatives and specifically look at our on track to graduate status, and then Glenn will get into our grading and homework practices that lead to graduation. So our initiatives for graduation are to increase the amount of students that are on track for graduation, to increase our graduation rate, and to increase the rate of successful course completion. So they all tie together. And when you look at data, and I just want to make a note that grades for our first semester post tonight at midnight. So this is preliminary data for our first semester. And you can see that some categories are making progress, and there is a dip in some of our specific subgroups, but overall we're making some progress towards where we want to be. I'm just moving quickly because we're on limited time frame, sorry. So if you look at our action steps and what we're doing for on track to graduate students obtaining credits, this year we're really using data to specifically schedule students based on their need, and this is part of our MTSS initiative, our multi-tiered systems of support. So schools are really working with their math data, and they're assigning them to intervention courses in language arts and math, and if it's needed, and they're also accelerating students who are identified in that category on their MAP data. And so the scheduling of students is very specific and systematic across the board in the secondary division and also at elementary. So we're also really looking at a lot of professional development for teachers and intervention courses at the Tier 2 and Tier 3 level of our MTSS structure. So those are intervention courses, or reteaching and supplemental information in our Tier 2 courses. So there's been a lot of training that the Professional Learning Department has implemented this year for our teachers. We're also looking at training our teams at the school level in secondary specifically. So this year, each secondary school has not only a foundations team, which focuses on the behavior component of MTSS, but then we also have an academic MTSS leadership team, which includes a variety of folks from their school, and they're attending monthly PD sessions to really specifically look at rigorous instruction. They're looking at what those intervention practices look like, and they've done school tours to see examples of those things. They're also really looking at how the scheduling process works through this new MTSS structure, and how to use that data for the scheduling, and how to do it as a school system as opposed to individuals. So they're doing a lot of work around that. And I think the biggest part of it is that we're reducing the variance of what each individual school is doing, and really making it a district-wide system for how we are getting kids into intervention classes and getting them the help that they need. So we don't have one particular school who's doing a real bang-up job and another school that maybe is struggling a little bit more. So we're really making that consistent across the board, district-wide. So, and then another focus that Glenn will get into a little bit more when he talks about grading is that we have developed automated reports about grading to principals, so they're able to keep track of teachers making regular updates in their grade book. And this, of course, helps us communicate with our families and our students and how they're doing on a weekly basis. So, and then we've also really systematically across the board asked teachers to be specific about updating their grade books on a weekly basis, and asking principals to really pay attention to that. So in looking at our next steps for credit attainment and on track to graduate, we just beginning next week in all of our Big 8 high schools, there's going to be some form of credit recovery for students who are have a failing grade in their first semester course. So if they've failed English 1 first semester, there's going to be an opportunity for them at their Big 8 high school to make that credit up either at lunchtime or after school, and to really address that failing grade right away, as opposed to waiting until summer school or a different school year. So that way they're not waiting to get that credit back. And there are other schools that have more specific programs. East High School, as an example, is taking students who have failed a first semester English course, and then they're actually having them retake that during the day, second semester, concurrently with their second semester English course. That's just an example, but they're doing it not only in after school opportunities or lunchtime opportunities, but they're also implementing that during the school day. So so all of our kids will get a good opportunity who need it to make up that credit. during a senior year at school, it's a real big focus for us at the high school level to consistently keep after our seniors, to keep them on track to graduate and make sure they know what they're taking. This time of year, if students are on the fence about where their graduation is going to be at the end of the school year, then counselors and staff members are specifically focused on those kids, and they check in with them almost weekly, if not more than that, depending on what the student need is. And we are going to plan to offer summer school in some capacity again this year for credit recovery for students, so that we can keep getting kids who need that remediation help to stay on track. We want to get them to that graduation line. We're also going to continue our MTSS work with professional development and training and team meetings and all of those things that are a part of an MTSS system. And then just as another option for kids to keep them engaged, you all heard at the last board meeting about the King Tech High School and moving to a full-time school and the name change from King Career Center to King Tech. So we're always looking for different ways to keep kids engaged. So with that, Glenn can take over for grading.
That was a lot of stuff. Well done. That was well done. So I had a half-hour presentation that I'll sadly have to just give you the 5-minute version of. So in our effort to, again, reduce the variance and maintain continuity amongst our schools and our classrooms, which is no small feat, we've been really looking very carefully at our grading processes. So the action steps that you see up there or in front of you right now are the manifestation of the work that we did as a committee last year. And I can affirm you as a board, and I can thank you very much as a board in your choice as a goal around grading as a step to graduation, because this is where the rubber really meets the road for our parents and our students and our teachers when it comes to efficacy and really feeling if you are a successful student or not. It's something that really gets to directly to positive student outcomes. It becomes very meaty stuff. And when you sit down with a group of educators or parents and you discuss a child's report card or their grades and what should be considered to go into those grades in that report card, you're going to have a discussion that can be wide-ranging and long-lasting. And that took most of last year to get us to the point to these action items for this year. I'm happy to say that we now can say that every classroom, every subject will have a grade per week. Our specialists, our music and art and our health teachers, every other week. Grading scales are now standardized throughout the district. And this is a big one, grade books are visible to parents, so you're able to go online and see what work your child has completed and what their grade is for them. And now this is just recently, as we've been working through our AASB and aligning our school board policy with AASB, students on long-term suspensions are now allowed to complete for credit classwork and assignments. Those students that have been suspended are already 1 or 2 steps behind, and penalizing them by not allowing them to have the work they need to get where they have to get was certainly providing double jeopardy. So I'm happy that we were able to change that. So if we go to the next slide. Well, really, we have been doing this year. We just have yet to create the administrative regulation that will now codify these. If I could go to the next slide, you'll see the draft of the AR that we'll be presenting and moving forward for hopefully your approval. So that will then become the realm of the coin of the realm, so to speak. And if we need to make adjustments, we certainly will. So now our next step, though, is homework, and that's a biggie. Homework involves tasks assigned to students by school teachers that are meant to be carried out during non-school hours. That's pretty innocuous when you hear it. Here's the other quote, which our committee enjoyed a great deal. Homework is a hotly contested area that many parents judge the effectiveness of schools by the presence or amount of homework, although often parents don't expect to be involved in this learning other than providing a quiet and secluded space. Now this next part is important. The overall effect of homework is positive. but there are some important moderators. And that's really where the devil is in the detail, is those moderators. We talked, I think at our last or second to last board meeting, we were looking at some barometers of influence around homework, and we were saying that homework itself had a barometer of influence around 0.27, 0.29, which isn't half bad. But then we also have a barometer of influence of 0.04, which is bad. It's not good. It's actually almost to the point where you're reversing academic outcomes, and that's on time spent on homework at the elementary level. Now, time spent on homework at the high school or middle school level is different. You start to see the barometer of influence squeech up, and squeech is a word. You will also find the barometer of influence moving up for students at the elementary level for 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, depending on if it's math or if it's English language arts or if it's social studies. I've created a curated list of research. That's what the committee has been working on. I'll provide that to Katy so she can provide that to you, because what you'll find when you look through the research is that homework, if utilized correctly, the right amounts, the right grade level, the right asks, is highly effective. It is extremely ineffective if you throw all of those things out the window.
No, I just wanted to say, this is great, because when Mr. Nielsen has been tasked with this job, and it's not an easy one, because it's so personally felt in every classroom, and he's doing a great job of sharing the difficulties in bringing around an agreement about a construct. And so he's the man to do it, as you can see. So I appreciate it. I said, please tell some of those stories.
Thank you for keeping me on track. Yeah. So in our committee, we are very fortunate. I have 20 educators, elementary, middle, and high school. And one of the individuals on the committee is a AP math physics teacher. I'm at high school, and we've identified 4 areas of friction. Very briefly, the 4 areas of friction are the achievement gap caused by homework, trying to work through the curriculum using homework, the purpose and the authenticity of the homework, and this is where the physics teacher came in, the choices that we are taking away from students in demanding, in her class, if they have to do since they're AP students, they all have some sort of public service that they're trying to do. They're trying to get the very best classes. They're trying to take all the sports. They just don't have time. And she's very concerned about that. Of course, she also made mention that, you know, she needs to make sure they're doing the right amount of homework for her and her class, because she sees an efficacy to that. And that really is the challenge, I think, for us right now, is we've identified these areas of friction. How do we then apportion our day? And if I could turn to the next slide as potential next steps, I would like to focus on that third, or the very last bullet there. We're looking at oh, no, not that one. I lost myself. Where is it? Determine the appropriateness. Where's the rubric? Is there another slide on that one? No. Or is that the last one? Okay, so one of the things that we didn't get up there, but one of the things that we are looking at putting together, and this will involve determining if we can do it technologically. I'm sure we probably can, but very similar as to parents looking at their child's grade book, we would like to create basically a child's homework for the week, for the calendar. So you can go on, you can see that Ms. Bishop will be assigning this, Ms. Marsett will be assigning that, Mr. Holleman this. You would then hopefully, even as a parent, be able to put in, maybe Ms. Snelling, tonight is our hockey night, this is when the kids are going to go. And so then the staff at the school can see that as well too, because we see this piling on effect, this overlay of homework from teacher to teacher, because they all want their kids to be successful. So that is one of the things that we'll also be looking at to mitigate the effects of the scheduling and the homework achievement gap. But I told them when we were getting ready, I could talk about this for hours, but I will give to Ms. Grant the research, some videos around homework equity, and she can get that to you. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer it.
Just one really quick one. So
Yes.
in this research that talks about in your second bullet point, the appropriateness of homework for all grade levels, because where I've had people contacting me is when a first grader had 3 hours of homework.
Yeah, I would say off the top of my head, without looking at any research, that would be inappropriate. That would be vastly
I
inappropriate.
believe that the actual research is saying for first grade it should be 10 minutes.
Yes.
And for each, like second grade would be 20. And those elementary grades up to, there's a certain grade.
Right, the Council of PTA, they would like to, like 5 or 10 minutes every year per grade as you advance, but, you know, 10 or 15 minutes of sitting and reading with your kindergartner or pre-K or first grader, that's appropriate, certainly.
Yeah, that's right. And Madam President of the Board, this is such a weighty task, grading and homework, and that's why I just appreciate the work that's done, because it's personal. It becomes personal, and yet personal for families, personal for kids, personal for schools, administrators, and Glenn is doing a good job of then really articulating the issues so that then we can, address them individually. So I regret that we didn't have enough time because we had so many questions prior to this time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. So that concludes that mid-year board goal district initiatives update, and we're going to move to our focus on staff and students.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe this is working. Can you hear me? Hi, my name is Deena Bishop, and I am the superintendent of ASD, and now is our section on focus on staff and students. And those new in the room, I just wanted to share that focus on staff and students was the brainchild of the board, if you will, about 1.5 years ago. Understanding that what makes ASD great is the people around and the people in ASD, whether they're employees, students, families, and community members. And so if the basics, Kicks for Kids, is the focus tonight and the partnership, and please come forward, Pam Skogstad, who is the president and founder, if she's here, of the basics, Kicks for Kids, as well as Courtney Elmer, Tom Bergen, Joyce Bergen, Cheryl Curtis, Maury Hanson, Stacy Fisk, Rick Hanson, Dave Mayo Kiley, Melanie Sutton, Bill Pugh, Patty Ortiz, and Heather Heltzer. If you are in the room, we want to see who you are and give you a proper thank you. And so I'm going to share the work. In Alaska, as you know, where the ground is often buried in snow or slick with ice, some students come to school wearing shoes that are duct taped together or share shoes with siblings and have difficulty participating in PE, recess, and sports because they don't have the proper shoes. Formed in April of 2012, the Basics is dedicated to the mission of providing gym shoes, sports shoes, and winter gear for children in need. The Basics mission is to empower children in need to choose healthy, active lifestyles. The Anchorage School District's Health and PE Coordinator, Melanie, as you know, Melanie Sutton, and Child and Transition Department Coordinator, Dave Mayo Kiley, there he is, helped to launch the Basics and its partner organization, Kicks for Kids, ensuring the programs would be effective with the support of staff. In the fall of 2012, the Basics partnered with the shoe recycling program, Kicks for Kids, and has supplied gym shoes and athletic shoes from Anchorage to Dillingham to Eagle River, Alaska, allowing students to participate in PE, recess sports, and recreation programs with the appropriate gear. All right, yes. To date, almost 10,000. Give us another cheer, little man. 10,000 pairs of shoes, boots, as well as winter coats, hats, and gloves. Aquarium PE teacher Bill Pugh has been an integral part of this process, collecting 2,000 pairs of shoes in 4.5 years. Wow. And there's more. I love this data stuff. So Over 75 schools in 3 major school districts, along with individual Alaskan Native villages, have been served. This model has allowed them to distribute shoes at an average cost of $2.22 a pair. Thank you for your ongoing support to provide the students of ASD and students across Alaska with shoes and boots necessary so that they can participate in healthy activity. We are absolutely grateful to you. You make ASD a better place to be for our families. We offer you an opportunity to share with us what you want us to know more about your organization and how we might help in the future. And you have to hold this really close.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, we have. Can you hear me? Yeah. It all started. I was an itinerant teacher with the school district, and this showcases what teachers and nurses and coaches in the districts do. We're all buying shoes for kids, and then what I thought, we have to streamline this. So in 2012, I put a board together, this amazing board, and I said, first year, we're not going to burn out the board. We raised enough money to buy 150 pairs of shoes. Now we're to almost 10,000. And the uniqueness about the basis is that we work with teachers, coaches, nurses, and they know the kids that need the shoes. So this is what resonates with sponsors, is that the shoes go directly to the kids without them waiting in line. And I'm going to give you a really great example, is that we've supplied 34 pair of wrestling shoes, one example, to Bettye Middle School. The Bettye Middle School coach is able to compete at the state level, has 2 state champions because of all these guys.
Would anyone else like to share anything? And we're going to get a great picture for our website too.
This is Bill. He's one of the
Wow, there you go. Share.
I specifically asked not to speak because I have no voice. It's been a long teaching day. No, we just started about 4.5 years ago. I think the Basics was only about 6 months old when we started collecting shoes at our school, and I can take 0 credit for this. I put out some blue bins and told my kids, you know what? When you outgrow your shoes, you get new shoes. You have shoes you don't want, bring them here because we can find people that need them, give them a second home, people that will be appreciative of that. And our school, we only have 400 students, and so the goal is every student bring in 1 pair every year. And so far we've been able to do that, and in 4.5 years, we just hit the 2,000 mark probably a week before Christmas, so it was a big kind of celebration in our PE classes, and so the buckets are there every day. My math kids, I also teach math and PE there. My math kids are in charge of counting them, getting them together. I call Maury comes and grabs them, clean them, boom, they get out, they get distributed. So that's what we do.
Your principal
That's what is here important. Thank you.
Come on up. Do you want to say anything?
Oh,
yeah, this program.
I'd rather him not.
Or maybe your teacher. He had a great day today.
It's a credit to his, the environment he creates in his gym, getting the kids thinking about other kids. They can do a little, he does a lot. His little message to them and his, kind of continual reminders, it pays big dividends. So when everybody pitches in just a little bit and the board volunteers their time and we all put a little bit in, we get a lot out as a business. So it's just a good example of that.
Well, we're grateful to you. Thank you so much for all you do.
We'd like to do a picture if we want to help. Leave it a little closer.
Really a lot closer. Yeah, a lot closer. We can have some people in the front if you want. You want to go in the front? Since you're the...
That's okay. Just stand up, and if you can see me, I can see you. Okay. But I can't see. There we go. All right.
Thank you so much once again. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Great job. That is our focus on staff and students. The basics make ASD great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll now consider a motion for adjournment of our work session.
Move to adjourn the work session.
And as I understand, there is no topics for executive session, so.
Correct.
We are adjourned until our regular session, unless there's objections. We are adjourned.